Yeah, fine.
So, you joined the Army. Were you drafted or did you enlist or?
Both.
Both, okay.
I went in the Army in June.
June, okay.
1943.
June, okay. So June 1943.
June 43.
Now, did you graduate high school also in 43?
I graduated from high school. I had 2 semesters at the University of Florida.
Okay. So
And,
Gainesville native, maybe?
I grew up in Miami.
Miami, okay.
And I had 2 semesters at the University of Florida. And I went back to Miami. And in June, I think it was June 20, I've forgotten the date. I got on a bus. I went down to the Masonic Temple where they were all gathered, and got on a bus. And Arnold Tucker sat next to me. Arnold Tucker and I were in the same graduating class from Miami High.
Okay.
And you know who Arnold Tucker was?
Name doesn't sound familiar.
He was a quarterback for our Army during the war, All-American. Blanchard, Tucker, and Davis were in the backfield. They were all-stars, all of them.
So you were good friends then with Arnold?
Yeah, I knew him, yeah. And he lives now in Coral Gables in a big retirement building in Coral Gables in Miami. And went to Camp Blanding, and I was inducted there. Stayed there about a week. I did KP about 4 days. And then they shipped me to South Carolina to camp, to a camp near Spartanburg. Camp something, I can't remember the name. Camp something. And I did basic infantry training there. And there were 4 big companies in this complex. It was a battalion, actually. And I had an M1 rifle. And it was the summertime, it was hot. And we did a lot of marching. We had to learn to dig slit trenches and foxholes, and we did several 25-mile hikes with a 9-pound rifle, an M1 rifle, and a helmet on your head, tin helmet, steel helmet, and about a 25 or 30-pound pack on your back. We marched 25 miles. We usually started in the afternoon, but we marched all night. And we'd get to a place where they said we were near the front lines. It was an imaginary front line. And we had to dig a hole in the ground, like a foxhole. And I never got very deep. And then the cooks brought up breakfast for us. And then we would get on trucks and go back to camp.
No, I'm sorry, I didn't catch. Was it the draft, or did you go down to the office and sign up? Or I know you said you were there with Arnold.
Well, both.
Okay.
I was drafted. They sent me. I have a letter from the president.
Okay.
And he invited me to join the Army, to join the military.
I see. Okay.
And I possibly could have joined the Army Air Corps or the Navy. I chose the Army.
Okay. So you got the letter, but it was your choosing which, where you went into, essentially.
Well, I'm not sure. I really am not sure. I think they put me in the Army. I'm really not sure.
Okay. You were in the Army one way or the other.
Yes.
So this is still summer of '43 that you're going through
Summer
boot camp and
43.
training.
And I went to the camp near, oh heck, I can't even think of the name of the camp. Golly. Near Spartanburg, South Carolina.
Okay. For after boot camp training.
And this was not boot camp now.
Afterward.
We did the same however, we did do the same training that the Marines did, except we did not do any beach landing. We carried the same weapon they carried, used the same type of equipment. We learned to shoot the bazooka, the machine gun, and we learned to launch the grenade from the rifle. We learned to do fighting with the sword on the end of the rifle,
Bayonet.
with the bayonet. We learned a little bit about jiu-jitsu, person-to-person combat.
Right.
It's not very. We learned. We ran. We did a lot of running, and
So camp landing for boot camp.
No, not boot camp. Camp landing is where we got inducted.
Inducted. I see. Okay.
Then I went to Camp Croft, C-R-O-F-T.
Okay.
Camp Croft.
And then Spartanburg, South Carolina. Okay.
That's near Spartanburg, South Carolina.
And then when you wrapped up at Spartanburg, was that the end of your training?
No, not, well, that was the end of basic training.
Okay.
Then I was shipped to, along with all the others, to University of Connecticut, to an ASTP program. And that stands for Army Specialized Training Program. The government had taken all the men, or most of the men, out of colleges and universities. And there were no men left in the colleges. And the Army didn't have enough space in their camps to put all the men they had. And so they put many of us in colleges and universities.
They had plenty of extra room, I'm sure, with all the men and women.
And at University of Connecticut, that's near Storrs, Connecticut.
Okay.
And in Storrs, at Storrs, Connecticut, we had college level courses. I'd had a couple of them already.
University of Florida.
At the university. But I had a repeat of English and history. And they gave us some advanced math and physics and chemistry, which I had not had. So that was an advanced course. I had one professor that had been in the same high school I had been in.
I'll be darned, all the way up in Connecticut.
In Miami.
I mean, you ran into the professor in Connecticut.
He was up there in Connecticut, and he taught physics. And
now, before I forget about University of Florida, what were you studying at UF the 2 semesters?
I was just a freshman.
You were just a freshman, so getting a lot of the gen eds out of the way.
I had planned to go into law school.
Okay.
But see, to get to law school, you got to get a bachelor's degree and then go to law school.
Right.
At that time, you could do 3 years and then go to law school.
So UF, you would have been there from...
I was on it 2 semesters.
43 to 44.
42.
Oh, sorry. 40.
Fall of 42, and then
spring of 43.
Spring of 43. In May, June, I left the University of Florida. Did basic training for 13 weeks at Camp Croft, University of Connecticut, for 1 semester. And the war was not going too well, and I thought that I wasn't in college, I wasn't in the Army to go to college. So I requested to go to a combat unit. And in
Had you not done that, do you think you would have been stateside through the remainder?
I would have been in the Battle of the Bulge and I've been killed or captured. That's who got captured and killed in the Battle of the Bulge. They sent fresh troops up there, and the Battle of the Bulge occurred, and those fresh troops hadn't been in combat, and they were overrun.
Right.
And our group had been up there for a couple of months, but we were not in the battle. Our division was not in the Battle of the Bulge. I was in the hospital then.
Okay.
Now let's get back to Connecticut.
Right.
And in Connecticut, I was there one semester, and I had a week's leave.
What were you studying at Connecticut?
It was
Just
actually,
military tactics, or?
No, it wasn't military tactics
At all?
It was
Okay.
a plain freshman college. That's all it was, plain freshman college.
They wanted some educated men still back at home.
They sure did. And they needed them. And at the end of one semester, it was after Christmas.
Christmas of 43.
It was 40, this would be 44 now. After Christmas, it would be January 44.
January 44. Okay.
January 44. I was shipped along with 13 others to Kentucky,
After you had requested to be in the combat unit.
yeah, they shipped me and 13 others. We went by train to Fort something
Something in Kentucky.
in Kentucky.
Okay.
And we stayed there. We were assigned to a signal company. The company commander came out and looked at us, and he saw that we had all had college, and that was and we all said yes. Now, we all had basic infantry, and we were pretty good at it. Now, we didn't have any idea what a signal company was all about, but we did know what the infantry was, and we didn't want it.
Right. Front
So
lines.
He said, "Do you want to be in the signal corps?" We all said, "Yes, sir," in unison. And then we stayed at that Camp Campbell.
Okay.
Campbell, C-A-M-P-B-E-L-L, Campbell. We stayed there about a week and a half, and it was winter time, and we were in winter clothes. And from there we went on Tennessee maneuvers, and we were all the bottom of the barrel. I mean, we were all the lowest rank they had. They didn't assign us to
Private
anything.
first class, or?
Nothing, not even that.
Really weird.
Just plain old private.
So you've been going through a private.
Just
Okay.
plain old private. And everybody was just plain old private. I mean, all of us in that group.
Right.
And we were, most of us were assigned to KP. In the field, there was very little hot water. We had to have a tent, and I tented with a fellow named Gittleman. He was a Jewish fellow, and we really liked each other. And we had central heat in our tent. We had a candle. He slept on this side of the tent, I slept on this side. We put a candle in the middle. We could close both ends of the tent and heat the tent a little bit. It was
And this
cold.
is still in Kentucky.
It was now we went from Kentucky to Tennessee.
Oh, I see. Okay.
We were in Tennessee maneuvers. And that really maneuver grounds were for the Army at that time in that part of the country. We had a huge section of ground around Lebanon,
Yeah.
and Nashville, and that whole section was maneuver grounds.
Essentially training, conditioning after your initial trainings that you went
Yes,
there. Okay.
yes. And we did KP for a while, then they assigned us to some units within the signal company. And at first I was assigned as an assistant driver, and I had to learn to drive the 10.5 ton truck, the 3/4 ton truck, and also the 2.5 ton truck.
Are these the ones with the canvas backs, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Now they both, they all had the canvas backs, or you could take the canvas off.
Right.
And so I learned to drive all those trucks.
Was it difficult? I mean,
Yes, you had a double clutch, and that double clutching is was really something.
So a normal clutch,
Have
you
you
just
ever
got.
double clutched?
Well, my car is a manual, but I guess that's just a
You
single
don't double
clutch. No, I don't know what a double clutch is, I guess.
You had a double clutch on the 2.5 ton truck, and going uphill especially was difficult. Double clutching from second gear to first gear going uphill, or from drive to second gear, and then if it got tough you had to go to first gear, double clutching all the time to shift, and that was kind of difficult. And for me it was anyway. And then it was cold also. It snowed a little bit. It rained a lot. And I was assigned to a line platoon. And in this platoon we put out telephone lines, which were 2-strand lines. Each strand had several little strands also, but 2 strands were wrapped around they were wrapped around each other, and there were 2 main strands for telephone lines, and we had to put up the telephone lines from division headquarters to regimental headquarters.
This is still training in Tennessee.
This is still on maneuvers.
Okay.
We're still out in the open. We live out in the open all the time. Sometimes we could stay in the barn where there's a little hay. Sometimes a farmer was in the house, sometimes he was not.
Is this just to get you accustomed to living outside, essentially?
Yes, in combat conditions. This was like combat, this was in combat conditions really. And we learned, and at that time, the people that were in tanks and trucks had to cross the river on a barge, and there were some people that were lost also at that time.
Really, just in maneuvers?
Yeah, that made the headlines. The tanks turned over and people in tanks drowned.
Do you remember when that was exactly?
This would be in February 1944.
February 19. Did you know the guys in the tank?
No, they were in another unit.
Okay. But the same general area you were in?
Yes, they were the same general area.
That must have been pretty hard for morale at the time.
Well, for them it was. We didn't know about it till later on.
Okay.
Now there were no, we did not have any of these iPads or television, or we had a radio once in a while, not often. At company headquarters they had a radio. We didn't have one in the field. We had no communications with anybody except on that telephone line, if we could make it work.
That you yourself ran the telephone
Yeah.
line.
And we spent, I guess, about 8 or 9 weeks on maneuvers, and we had to learn to live out in the open and sleep in pup tents. We had to dig holes for foxholes. We had to dig slip trenches for pooping in. We had, because that's what you had to do. We had, at earlier times, I don't think they did that sort of thing. They just they pooped in the ground. But in the Army, you had to, if you were out by yourself, you just dug a hole for yourself.
Right.
But if you were in a unit, you dug a slip trench, and everybody pooped in the slip trench. And that's what we did on maneuvers around company headquarters or platoon headquarters, if we had headquarters. Sometimes we slept in barns, sometimes we slept out in the open, and sometimes we slept in the truck. And now there were 4 squads in this platoon. We were all linemen, and one squad would put out lines for one regiment, the next squad would put out lines for another regiment, the next squad would put out lines for another regiment, and sometimes one of the squads would also put out lines for an artillery unit or a tank unit in addition. And at the end of maneuvers, we went to a big camp near Columbia, South Carolina. Camp what? Did I say Campbell? Jackson, Fort Jackson.
After Tennessee.
We at the end of maneuvers, it was beginning spring.
Okay.
And we went to Fort Jackson near Columbia, South Carolina. And there we did close order drill again. We learned to climb telephone poles. We had done some of that on maneuvers, but some of us had not learned to do that very well. And at Fort Jackson, we actually had to climb telephone poles. We had leggings that came to about here, and a spike down here, and a strap around your foot, and straps around your legs, and the metal went all the way up here, down here, and you strapped that thing on your leg, and you had to go climb a pole like this.
Now, would there have been actual telephone poles in combat?
Occasionally, not often. It depends on where you were. And sometimes, and we had a belt on when you climb a pole. And the belt went around your waist, and there was another big belt that was about 2.5 feet long. And when you went up the pole and you got to the place you wanted to be, about 10 feet up, you'd take that belt and you would wrap it around the pole and clip it to your belt around your waist. And you'd have those 2 feet spurs in the pole, and you could lean back on the belt, and you could pull that wire and tie it around that pole, and wrap it around the pole and tie.
And essentially shimmy up the thing.
You had to learn to tie the wire so it wouldn't come down.
Right.
And you had to be up high enough so that when tanks came around with an antenna on it, they wouldn't knock it down. Because if they knocked it down, you had to go fix it in the middle of the night sometimes, with no lights in the truck. And that was a real problem. We learned to do that on maneuvers.
Have to do everything in the dark so as not to reveal yourself to the...
Yes, and when we fixed the line at night, we had our flashlight and our raincoats, and we would put this piece and bring them together and tie a big knot and make sure it was good. And it was kind of difficult to pull those 2 pieces together because you had to have a knot here and a knot here, and you had a loose end here on both ends, and you could tape the thing up really good so it wouldn't have water come into it at all. And we made sure that the lines were good because we did not want to go out and fix it again, especially at night or in the rain. And then in Fort Jackson, we were able to go to town sometimes, and at Camp Croft, I like to go to town to go to church, and at Fort Jackson, I like to go to town to go to church also. And at the Presbyterian church especially, they had big dances every Saturday night. At the Methodist church, they had a smaller basement, and they had some dances there too. And we went there. I went there as much as I could. And
so how long were you in South Carolina for before you shipped overseas?
In August, the D-Day was June 6th,
right,
in France at Normandy. Now we were still at Fort Jackson doing our training, marching, learning to climb poles, learning to tie the lines, doing all kinds of duties, like infantry, except we were signal people. And other platoons, one was a message platoon. They had a lot of jeeps, and they would do messages by jeep, and they had to. And another platoon had some radios, and they did that. And another platoon was in charge of all the vehicles. They had to make sure all the vehicles worked. And also we had to make sure our own vehicles worked. In addition to, if anything was majorly wrong with it, the platoon which had charge of all vehicles would take care of it. Now, here comes August. In August, we're shipped to, the last part of August, we're shipped to New York, to a place, to a big camp there, and outside of New York City.
And you'd probably, up to this point, heard about D-Day.
Oh yes, we knew all about D-Day.
Do you remember what you had heard and what your thoughts were?
June 6, 1944. Well, we were glad we weren't there.
You had heard that it was pretty bad in some places?
Yes. And already there had been some big battles, and D-Day was very destructive for our own forces as well as the Germans. The Germans expected us to land at Calais, up near England.
Right.
But we landed at
the narrowest point.
We landed, that was only 25 miles from England.
Right.
We landed at Normandy, which is way down here, near the base of the Cherbourg Peninsula. And so we went to New York City, and we got on our ships. Now, see, there were about 15,000 men in this infantry division. Now, the section I was in got on a smaller ship, and we, I guess we probably had maybe 800 or 900, I really don't know. We might not have had that many. And in the convoy across northern Atlantic, we had an aircraft carrier in front of us. Destroyers were going back and forth between the ships all the way across.
Just kind of as a protection patrol?
Oh yes. Destroyer escorts were running all around the ships. The convoy was big. It was as far north as you could see, and as far south as you could see.
Hundreds of ships.
I don't know how many. I didn't try to count them. I tried to count them, but I couldn't.
Okay.
There were warships, destroyers, and aircraft carrier. Part of the time the aircraft carrier was in front of us, part of the time it was behind us.
Do you remember the aircraft carrier's name?
No, never knew. And sometimes the planes would take off and fly around.
Scouting.
Never did see a submarine. The Germans sank a lot of ships, but they didn't sink ours. I don't think they sank any in our convoy. I think we had complete control of the seas in August.
Right.
In late August anyway. On September 7th, our ship came to Normandy landing area.
Did y'all bypass England and go straight to Normandy, or did you stop in
We
England?
went straight to Normandy. We were told that we were the first group that went straight to France without going to England. That's what they told us. And some ships had a large number of men on board, maybe 10,000. I don't know. I met 5,000 maybe. But they had to go to a big port, Cherbourg, or some of the port that had a lot of facilities so that they could dock. Our ship came up as close as it could to the beach, and we got on a big rope ladder.
Do you know what your ship's name or what class
No.
it was? Was it a transport ship primarily?
No, it was a banana boat.
Banana boat. Okay.
It had been converted to carry a few troops.
So it wasn't, as big as some of the.
No, it was not. It was not like an ocean liner at all.
Now, what was your, before I forget, what was your, division, army, and so on?
I was in the 26th Infantry Division.
26th Infantry
In the Signal
Division.
Company, the 39th Signal Company, that was part of the 26th Infantry Division.
Okay. And you're still a private at this point?
Yes, yes. Most everybody was.
Now, is your primary duty, it's truck driving for laying telephone cable?
Laying telephone cable.
Right. And pretty much probably everyone knows how to do,
And you had to,
all the tasks that are required to do so.
and you were supposed to be able to drive the trucks also.
Everybody.
Most
people are better
most
than,
everybody.
some are better than others, I'm sure.
Most everybody. And so we landed in France September 7, 1944. There were no Germans around. We climbed down this rope ladder with a pack on our back, our rifle on our shoulder. We carried a carbine, not an M1 now. At this point, we were not considered frontline troops. We were considered the backup troops, support troops, and we landed we climbed down the rope ladder to a landing craft, just like the landing craft they had on D-Day. And there were, half our company could get on this landing craft. And the landing craft taxied up to a long steel pier. The pier must have been about 50 yards long, something like that. Okay. And the landing craft lowered the front end, and so we walked off the landing craft right on the steel, 25 or 30 feet high. We had to climb the hill. Wasn't too steep, really. There were no Germans around, though.
There's probably a lot of U.S. infrastructure, tents and...
Nothing
really?
there, nothing there. All the troops had left the beach. Everybody left the beach except us, that we could see anyway. Then we marched.
Was this the exact beach where was this Omaha Beach?
This was the very beach that
Omaha.
troops landed on D-Day.
Did you realize that at the time?
I think it was Utah.
It was Utah, okay.
I think it was Utah.
Did you realize the significance of that beach at the time?
Oh yes, we sure did. We sure did. And we saw a few ships that had been hit there. We saw a couple of ships that had been sunk.
Just kind of abandoned in the water, essentially.
They were just there. We also saw some of the big barriers. That
Pillboxes and
put in
stuff.
there. We didn't see the pillboxes at that point. There were no pillboxes there. See, the Germans expected invasion of Calais. They didn't expect the invasion of Normandy. The big tank divisions were at Calais, not at Normandy. And although they had plenty of troops at Normandy, they had pretty good fortifications too. So we marched, and it rained, and it rained. And the sergeant in charge of our, one of the sergeants in charge of our platoon was a small guy. He was about 35 years old. And we kept marching, and it was raining. And he was having a tough time. So a couple of us one man took his pack, and I took his rifle. And in another group, somebody else took the old man's stuff and carried it. And we got the sergeant. We kept the sergeant going.
How old would you estimate he would have been at the time?
He was probably about 35, I imagine. See, this was the National Guard Division for the state of Massachusetts. And there were a lot of us in this company now that were much younger. See, we had not stayed in the Army at all. We were just fresh, and we were younger.
I might have missed it, but how did you get involved with Massachusetts? Was that just where they sent you
That's
to?
where they sent us.
Just almost, it almost seems haphazard, random, I guess.
That's where they needed some troops.
Okay.
That's where they needed some fresh blood and some high intelligence.
So you weren't necessarily affiliated in any way with Massachusetts. That's just
No.
where they happened to send you.
They need some fresh blood and some high intelligence in that division. And the company commander wanted us there because we had college.
Right.
Most of the men did not have, well, some of the men did not have any college at all. And our group, and the group that I was in, all of us had some college. Some of us had 1 year, some had 2 years, some had 3 years. I don't think anybody had 4 years, but we had some college. And everybody was pretty sharp. One day in our close order drill, at Camp Croft, in basic training, we were doing close order drill. This is back in South Carolina now. We were having close order drill. And we had to do port arms. We marched. Then we were in a stationary position. We had to stand at attention, do attention, port arms, shoulder arm, right shoulder arm, left shoulder arms, and all the other maneuvers with the rifle. And the company commander came over and to the fellow next to me. He said, "Son, you're pretty slow on getting that rifle moved around your shoulder. What's your IQ anyway?" And the fellow said, 165, sir. And the company commander didn't ask him any more questions. There was not a smile in the whole platoon. And nobody's mouth moved, nobody's face moved, but there was a small sound of snickering and laughter that went through the whole air, but nobody moved. Not a face moved or anything. The company commander left. Now we go back to Europe.
He was satisfied with the answer then.
The guy had the highest IQ in the whole world.
It just so happened to pick the one with the highest IQ.
He was a Jewish fella. He was really sharp.
Not the same one that you bunked with.
No, he was a big guy. He was about 6'4".
So you finally get to Europe September 7th.
September 7th, we get to Europe. And we're in France. And we stay around the base of the Cherbourg Peninsula for several days, maybe 2 weeks.
Just camping in tents.
And we camped in tents.
And there's probably a big buildup of U.S. military there.
We had good, and the cooks fixed us good meals, and it rained some, and we were able to eat some of the apples on the trees.
Was it a big buildup there of U.S. troops at the location you were?
I guess there must have been. And while we were there, we were able to go into a big German fort that had a big gun in it, and the fort had been left abandoned.
And this
obviously
was
and the big gun had the muzzle on the big gun was wider than your hand could stretch.
Wow!
It must have been about 12 inches in diameter across the end of the muzzle. And
it wasn't the 88 millimeter
Oh, no, I don't know what it was. It was about, I have no idea what it was. It was a huge thing.
Was this a fort? Do you remember which city this would have been near or
No,
in?
it wasn't near any city at all. It was
Just kind of out there.
It was on the coast, and it was fixed so it could aim down on the beach and not out, and also out at sea.
And this was obviously not a place where the U.S. and England invaded. This was further down.
Oh, this was on near the Cherbourg Peninsula.
Okay.
On the Cherbourg Peninsula. Then, about the end of September or the 1st of October, we got on our trucks and we went in a convoy through San Lo, which had been destroyed by the bombers and the troops as they went through there. We went through some other places that had been destroyed pretty badly by the troops, the Germans and the Americans and the bombers. And then we
So you saw the town bombed out. Were there also German bodies? And
no, this was all the bodies had been picked up that had been killed, and the towns were destroyed pretty badly. And you've seen pictures of this in your movies.
Were there homeless people around? Or?
Probably, but we didn't see any. Probably there were. Some of them could live in the rubble of the house or the village, and some couldn't. And we went in a convoy around the outskirts of Paris. Then went to the outskirts of Nancy, France, up to northeast France. Then we got to a place near near Luxembourg and Saarbrücken, and there we stopped. And our infantry relieved the 4th Armored Division. The 4th Armored Division had been the spearhead of Patton's 3rd Army drive across France. And we're up near the German border now. And here is a fresh unit of infantry going up into the front lines against the Germans. No base, no combat experience yet.
And you're in support of these infantry units with your telephone wire.
Our signal company and other support units were behind the infantry. The infantry was up there in their foxholes.
And this is the 26th?
26th Infantry Division.
Okay. National Guard.
We were on the right flank of the 3rd Army in northern France. There was another army that was coming in from Marseille, and they would come in and they would be on our right flank all the way down to Switzerland. That army would be. Now, our signal company would establish itself in whatever location they could find that would be available and abandoned and available. Sometimes we were sometimes the company headquarters would be in a barn. Sometimes it would be in a big
abandoned building, maybe, or
whether would it be an
bigger tent,
abandoned barnyard, and they would have a big quadrangle fenced with rock walls or concrete block walls, and a barn, and in front of to enter that big barnyard would be a couple of rooms with hay in it, and there would be a place where they could put their animals, and there were animals where we were, and we would headquarter in the barn or in a big barnyard place that would be fenced in, or some other place that we could find.
Is this for the whole 26th, or is this just for the signal
force? This is just our company. Okay. Just our company. Now the division was in 3 regiments, one here, and one here, up in the front lines. And sometimes there would be another regiment, but it would be in the rear, and it would be a support unit. And ever so often, a regiment on the front line would go to the rear, and a rear company or regiment would come to the front. And that's the way they would run.
Do you remember when it was?
And this would be November now.
Okay.
And it was pretty cold. A little bit of snow was falling, not too much sun.
Up to this point, had you had a chance to lay telephone wire?
Oh yes, we had laid some telephone lines for an advancing regiment or unit, and we were responsible for keeping telephone lines and communication between regiment and division, and also between division headquarters and other support units like artillery, or maybe a small tank unit, or maybe some other kind of special unit.
And is this a situation where, so telephone A, telephone B, they could be miles apart and you have to run the spool the whole way? Spool of wire?
Yes. Our truck, our 2.5 ton truck, was equipped with a huge frame which could hold a spool of wire, which was probably about that big around. What is that? About 2 feet,
Okay.
18 inches in diameter, and it would be about 18 to 2 feet wide, and it would be, and this big spool would have wire wrapped around it.
Then this is obviously in the day before walkie-talkie, so it had to have that wire connecting
Oh yeah,
it to.
we didn't have any. We had no walkie-talkies. We had no iPads. We had no way of keeping communications except by wire,
Right.
or telephone. And our wire made the telephone work. If without the telephone, without our wire, the telephone didn't work.
It seems like with the advancement, you would have to be running new wire almost all the time.
Yes.
Do you ever go recruit old wire, or do you just start fresh every time?
Well, we usually started fresh because it was too difficult to get the old wire back.
And is this old wire, is it just laying on the ground, or do you have it elevated?
No, the wire had to be way up in the air. And occasionally it had to be on the ground. If there were 100 yards of land and no trees, it had to be on the land. But
So are you hanging it up in the trees?
oh yes, we put the wire up in the trees as high as we could get it. We tied it in as tight as we could tie it. If there were telephone poles, we climbed those. Sometimes telephone poles were steel or metal, and they would usually have crisscross.
The logs were crisscrossed? Or?
Crisscross, this way, and with crisscrosses, X's on the telephone poles, because they didn't have as much wood as we had in our country, so they used metal. And we had to climb those things to put the wire up. And we didn't have to use spurs then, but we kept our spurs on anyway. And we'd tie the lines in as high as we could get them. And then in November, we're going to come to November 20 here right now. And November 20, we had been out doing telephone lines about a month, I guess, a little more than a month.
Near the German border?
Near the German border. It's up near Saarbrücken. And we were kind of experienced.
Y'all are pros by this point.
We were kind of experienced, actually. We had been under shell fire a couple of times. We had been strafed by airplanes.
Oh my gosh, did you see the actual plane?
Oh yes, we saw the planes. One day we were cleaning our little 3/4 ton truck and making sure it would work and everything. And here comes a plane. We called him Bedtime Charlie. He came over about every night, and he would strafe something. And sometimes shells would fly over our barn or where we stayed at night. Luckily, we were not hit. And
Were you ever caught out in the open when the plane came in?
yes, we were out in the open a couple of times when the planes came, when a plane
Did you just hit the ground?
No, I jumped into a big hole next to me. And the other man jumped under the truck. But I was in a better place than he was. I jumped in a big hole. And it had been a foxhole with a roof over it. And so here we get to November 20. On November 20, we were putting in a new telephone line for the advancing regiment that was coming up.
Within the 26th.
26th Infantry Division. All this in 26th Infantry Division. The 39th Civil Company was. Now, other platoons were doing other things. Some were in jeeps. Some had telephones, or some had radios. The radios worked sometimes, and sometimes they didn't.
So you did have wireless communication to a degree?
Some, yes, but nothing like today.
The most reliable is the wired.
That was the most reliable, yes, if you could keep it working. November 20, we were putting in a new telephone line for an advancing regiment. We found a big barn where they told us the headquarters was going to be for the new regiment advancement. and we had a big 2.5-ton truck. There were 3 or 4 buildings close to us besides the barn. The shells began to land near us.
Artillery?
Artillery shells began to land near us from the German shells now. And we hid in the buildings as much as we could till the shelling let up. Then our truck went down the road laying out the line. 2 of us were behind the truck, and I was climbing a tree and a pole. The other man was behind me, and he was climbing a tree and a pole, and we tried to keep the line going as fast as we could, and the truck would move ahead of us, and the spool of wire would be rolling out. Somebody would be on the truck making sure the wire would come out right, and then he would have to put a new spool of wire on when that one ran out. And there were 2 dead Germans in the road. Our truck went around those. We went through a small village.
Was that the first, do you need to get that?
No, she got it.
Was that the first dead bodies you had seen in the war? Those 2 Germans?
No, there have been a couple of others. But these were right in the middle of our road where we were going. And so we went around those, and we came through a small village, and there were a couple of people staying in the village still. In this small village, there were only 3 or 4 houses there. And there was a tank that had been knocked out by the Germans.
American tank, Sherman tank.
An American Sherman tank, yes. And then we went out, we went on, and we met the part of the squad who was coming from the rear. Our squad had been up front, going toward the rear. The other half of the squad was in the rear, coming toward us.
And you would just meet the telephone wires.
Met, and we tied in the lines, and somebody tested the line to the rear and made sure it worked and all that. And we tied in the lines. Then we were ready. Now 2 big trucks were 2 big trucks, 2.5 tons, were parked head to head, just a few feet apart, on the side of the road. The road was a dirt road, ditches on both sides. And there was an American tank about 30 feet away that had been knocked out by the Germans. And here we had two squads of men. This would be about 15 men, I guess, probably, all together, and in two trucks and two wires. And we were ready to move out. And I jumped on the truck to get something out of the truck. And as I jumped off the truck, I landed in a pool of water. And that's the last I remember till I woke up in the hospital 3 days later. That was on November 20, 1944. And
so there were 15 guys total.
Probably.
And what made the landmine go off?
Our truck ran over a landmine. Now, for 50 years, I thought that an artillery shell had landed here. I did not exactly like the Army. All the men in the Army took care of each other as much as we could, no matter whether you liked them or not. We all tried to take care of each other as much as we could. All the enlisted men and all the officers. Even though they may be different a little bit, we try to take care of each other, every one of us, no matter where we were from. And we were from all over the country in our unit. And so I wound up in the hospital. It was November 20 when I was hit. 3 days later, I woke up in the hospital, not too far from Nancy, France. The hospital had been used by the Germans and the French. It was a big building, 1 story. It had one level in this big room, and it had good toilets and running water and sinks and mirrors. And I was able to reach down. When I woke up, I didn't know where I was. And I reached down to see if I had any feet.
You knew
my feet were there, my toes were there. I felt all over my body. I seemed to be all there. Then I felt my head. I could see out of one eye. The other eye had bandages all across it. You can see the scar there still.
Do you think you were lost an eye?
No, I could see out of the eye, but
it was just black.
It was black, and the bandage covered most of my eye because the wound was all the way from here to there, and they just covered the whole thing with bandage. And I had a little scar down here, and then on my back I had bandages all over my back, on the back of my left arm and on my back.
Sounds like you came out relatively all right, probably compared to what some of the other...
Well, and I do not know what happened to the other men. I never found out. 50 years later, see, I thought that an artillery shell had landed close by for 50 years. In the meantime, I started to work as a teacher in Dade County, Florida, which is my home. I taught school there, and then I moved to Pensacola, and I became a college administrator at Pensacola Junior College. And this, in 50 years, 1944 to
94.
1994. For a few years, I was taking the Army Times or some kind of a military magazine, and I began to see that there were reunions. Now, for a long time, I didn't have enough money to go anywhere. Teacher salaries were not very high. When I got to Pensacola, salaries, and I had an administrative job, salaries were a little better. See, I had a master's degree and a little bit more.
Which you got obviously after you came back to the States.
When I got back to the University of Florida, I got my master's degree and a little bit more. And
bachelor's in what now?
I was in the College of Education.
College of Education.
My major was in the social sciences.
Okay.
And I was teaching 7th grade through 12th grade. I taught in Hialeah Junior High School, Hialeah High School. I taught Robert Graham in the 7th grade and the 8th grade in Florida history and U.S. history. And he was a very bright young man. And I had some very smart students.
When you say Robert Graham, is that of the Graham Center?
The Robert Graham. He was in the 7th grade. His father was a state senator for Florida. I invited him to come to our class and talk with our class about Florida government. And Robert Graham was a very bright young man. And he became a student leader in student government in junior high school and at Miami Senior High School. He then went to the University of Florida and had the same history teacher I had at Miami High, and at the University of Florida he prepared to go to law school. His teacher in Miami High told him he ought to go to the University of Florida first and then go to Harvard for law school. He went to Harvard for law school, and he became Florida's governor. Then he became Florida's senator. He was in Florida government and U.S. Senate for most of his professional life.
So before we get too far, so 3 days after the landmine,
I woke up in the hospital.
In the hospital.
Right.
Now, how did you get back to the were you sent back to the U.S.
No,
after you recovered?
I was not sent back to the hospital. I found I was all there after I woke up in the hospital. A medical nurse, a male nurse came to see how I was doing, and he said it was all right. He checked my pulse, and he said I was all right. I was going to be okay.
Were there a lot of other injured soldiers around you?
There were about 40.
Some of them in probably worse shape than you were.
Some of them perhaps in worse shape than I was. I know they were. And I was able to get up and go to the bathroom. I hadn't been to the bathroom to pee in at least 3 days, or to poop either.
They didn't give you like a bedpan or something?
Well, at this point I could get up.
Okay.
I staggered up. The orderly helped me get up and stagger to the bathroom. I took a pee. I went in and washed my face and hands. I looked in the mirror, and I was a real mess. I had bandages over my head and my back. And
it probably looked a lot worse than it was.
And I thank the good Lord that I was all there. My first thought was to thank the Heavenly Father that I was all there. I was so grateful. And I went back to bed, and it was Thanksgiving Day. I woke up. I was out for 3 days, but I woke up on Thanksgiving Day, on the 3rd day I rose. The orderly came and helped me eat my lunch. He propped me up in the bed, and he fed me my lunch. And
you're probably pretty hungry.
I hadn't eaten in 3 days, or more. I don't know. It might have been more than that, because I hadn't eaten that day I heard. And so the orderly came and fed my lunch, and then here comes the doctor. Now this gets gruesome. Now the doctor came and looked at me, checked my pulse, he checked my blood pressure, he looked at me, and already eaten. And he said I was going to be all right. But before he could move, I threw up all over him. Whoop! All over him. And I tried to apologize. I didn't know what to say.
Well, did he have a nice dress on? And
well, no, he didn't have a dress. He
or no, sorry, not a dress.
He
but
had a regular uniform on. I think he was a first lieutenant.